So, you're at your LGS, as you always are. It's another week. It's another time to play Commander. Another great day, you think. I can't wait to play my mid to high power, mid-range jank deck. Oh boy, I can't wait to play my 4-card combo deck. My goodness, I just can't wait to play my aggro deck that loses every game because of a board wipe. Man, I just cannot wait to play my group hug deck. Yippee! You are ecstatic as you head into your LGS. You simply cannot wait to play some Commander. You just got off of your 9 to 5 and you're getting ready to play, and then your opponent brings out Captain Angathrod. They say, oh, it's just a normal mill deck. I'm just gonna play some mill. That dreaded word. The 4-letter word that sounds worse than any other 4-letter word out there. Mill. Can you believe this person? Can you believe they're really gonna play a mill deck? Oh my gosh. They're gonna play mill. They're gonna steal my card. They're gonna stop me from playing the game because all my cards are going to be in the graveyard when they should be in my hand or on the board. Now I got to play around this guy. You either got to target him more, or you have to play a deck so powerful that it doesn't really matter because his deck's going to steal your cards anyways. It's never fun to go up against a mill deck. At least that's what you've been told to think. I'm here to tell you why mill actually is fun. Now, before you go and cancel me, before you go and say that Deck Driver, again, with his crazy opinions, needs to be exiled and needs to be destroyed and put in the graveyard for good. Before you go say those things, yes, I understand. Mill can be frustrating to play against, but you can make it fun as long as you shift your mindset around playing the game, as well as if you can understand how to kind of build your decks around a more fortifiable strategy that has more flexible game plan. If you're losing half your deck to getting milled, hopefully the other half of your deck performs just as well. And if it doesn't, maybe you need to check out your deck. So let's go into it. I'll be covering 3 points in this video. The fact that mill decks' powers are congruent to the tables. They usually can't be more powerful if they're based around stealing. And if they are more powerful, they'll probably be in more of a self-mill kind of deck anyways. Mill is simply a different form of card advantage, and so the deck's power is only going to grow with the decks around it. Mill encourages better deck building from your opponents, and it requires them to have a more flexible game plan or a more optimized deck with plenty of options in it, whether in the graveyard or not. And lastly, mill expands a pilot's knowledge of cards and expand and grows their decision-making skills within a game of Commander. Let's get to the first point. Mill decks, or any kind of thief deck, while salty, and while you might want to be able to just play your cards, mill decks can only be as good as the decks around it, simply because in most of the times they're stealing cards, or they depend on the graveyard being a key factor, which means if the cards in the rest of the pod are not very good, there's only so much the mill deck can actually do with those options. So you're almost never going to have a mill deck that overperforms in every single pod, and the only time a mill deck will be very powerful is because the decks around it are very powerful. Now, on the flip side, some mill decks will be very, very strong, but I tend to see the decks that are built around mill that are very independently strong, no matter what they play against, are more optimized for their own graveyard. Think Marin or Muldrotha. While these cards can be very good at milling out the rest of the libraries, these cards are also incredibly powerful using their own graveyards, simply because you can recur so easily through them. This is the only time I can kind of see a problem with mill, but since they are more focused on their own graveyards, it's less mill being played, which means it's less salty. So that's where you kind of got to think of the balance. Mono blue, mill you as fast as possible, versus a more versatile self-mill kind of deck is 2 totally different experiences. While mill for the sake of mill could certainly be an unfortunate deck archetype, simply treat it like an aggro deck. If your opponent is trying to steal and take away your resources as fast as possible, they are no better and no different than a mono red aggro deck that's trying to kill the table as fast as possible. Now, how do you deal with these? You easily target them 3 versus 1. Every player can just simply say, hey, this person's trying to mill us as fast as possible. We should probably kill them first. And then you can put all your effort into politicking, getting that player out of the table as fast as possible. This is why a lot of mill decks typically go more of the, I'm going to mill as an engine rather than I'm going to mill to win the game. So now that we've got that covered and how deck's power levels definitely are congruent to the rest of the table, let's talk about how mill encourages players to build better decks that have a more flexible game plan. Like I said in the intro, if half of your deck is missing and the other half cannot perform nearly as well, that might be a problem with the deck that you've built. Think about it this way. In a normal game of Commander, you wouldn't have seen those cards anyways. You're not going to get through 50 cards of your deck, and your deck still needs to perform and try to win the game. So if those 50 cards were in the graveyard or in your deck, what really is the difference? It's kind of the analogy of, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's around to hear it, does it really make a sound? If you were never going to see those cards anyways, why does it matter if they're in the graveyard or in your library still? It doesn't change much. But if you think the fact that you're being milled out is the reason your deck is not winning against the mill deck, you might be sadly mistaken. Because again, your deck should be strong enough that it's not maybe reliant on a single card to be in your hand or on the battlefield, whereas instead it should be optimized to play through multiple different win conditions and have a flexible enough game plan to get you over the hump. So if mill is stopping you from doing that, it's time to take a look at your deck. Now, we've gone through this video pretty fast. It's a pretty short checklist of things that you might need to think about when going up against mill. And really, it's a super simple mindset fix. You just need to change your perspective on how you think the game is played. I can certainly see why mill can be unfun, because while mill 13 cards is a lot more common than draw 13 cards, in a mill deck, they're basically one and the same. If you're able to mill half their library, that's around 40 to 50 cards that you're milling, but there's only a few spells that let you draw half of your library, especially for such a cheap price. So that's where mill decks definitely do have an advantage in some way. The fact that they can get card advantage at a much easier rate. The only counter I can really give you for that is the fact that mill decks are much harder to play. Because a lot of the resources in their deck are mostly spent to keep milling cards, they don't actually have a lot of cards that further their own game plan besides getting cards in graveyards. Because of this, I can definitely see why mill might be frustrating when it seems like the deck has no real clear game plan and yet also gets so much card advantage through milling an entire table's worth of cards. But in the end of the day, I think it all balances out due to the fact that mill is such a hard game to play. So let's get into that. This is my third and final point. Mill expands a pilot's knowledge of cards and decision making within a game of Commander. Because of the previous 2 points, and because the fact that your deck in a mill deck is usually reliant on everybody else's cards, having a lot of game knowledge, card knowledge, and really good decision making is crucial for somebody playing mill. So when you're on the side of mill, knowing when to get the 10-10 bomb versus getting a value piece that might draw you more cards in the game, it's good to know where your board state is, where you are in the game, what kind of threat assessment is coming your way, and what the next couple turns might look like for you. Then it's about making that choice. It's also about being flexible of when do you mill, when do you steal, and a little bit of luck of what cards am I even going to get. I know that this deck has a really good card, but am I going to mill it so I can actually take it? Who knows? Also, knowing what each card does is a huge thing. Being able to learn cards and understand how they might function in the rest of your table might be really good, as well as stealing valuable pieces from your opponent's decks. Maybe you don't need something nearly as much, but your opponent needs it that much more. It might be a good idea to take that, because who knows, maybe they have planned around mill and maybe they can get it back. Because of this, I think on the opposite end, when playing against mill, it's good to understand that your game gets a lot harder and a lot more complex when a mill player is present. But because of that, and because we like high power Commander and we like high skill Commander, this should be something that's fun and very refreshing when playing. The fact that you have to think so hard about what needs to be done and what cards to play at what time, and how much should I draw, how much should I focus on drawing, how much should I focus on attacking, how big of a threat is the mill player. It's a lot of really tough decisions that you must make all in one game. Whereas in a normal game, typically information's a lot more hidden. In mill game, half the cards are available to see because graveyards are a public zone. So decisions become a lot more public, a lot more political, and a lot more difficult. So keep this in mind the next time you play against a mill deck. I promise you, it's not as bad as you might think. Thanks for watching.